Hey, welcome back to the channel and to another story of exactly 1,000 words written on the spot without an outline and, of course, inspired by artwork and music, in fact. If you couldn't tell by the thumbnail, this one's going to be a little bit gloomy, a little bit dark, but those are two of my favorite things, so I could not resist. And for the soundtrack of the story, I revisited an artist that I haven't listened to in some time. However, they are a favorite of mine, and that artist is called Def Center. I listened to the album called Owl Splinters. It's ambient, but there's a lot more melodic qualities to it. A lot of ambient is just kind of droning, but this, in fact, has some somber tones. So cue up the sadness and let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Eva, and it's by an artist named Elena Nikishina from Moscow, Russia. I'm sure you can understand what drew me to this one. It's very gloomy. We have a woman walking through a field, short grass it appears to be. It looks like she's wearing a wedding dress that is half stained. Her eyes are closed. There's some kind of bucket or a large bushel of grass beside her. But most interestingly are these strange creatures, these four-legged, ghostly, almost ghostly creatures walking about her. And appropriately, the sky is shrouded with clouds. I love this one for a few reasons. Number one, obviously, is the execution style. I love the rough brushwork and the minimal palette. But also these creatures. Are they good? Are they bad? What are they? And why is she wearing a wedding dress out in the middle of this field? A lot of great seeds for stories, I think. And this is the art I love the most because of that reason. These artists, they do a lot of great visual storytelling by giving you these elements that don't seem to go together and cues that will help you devise your own stories. Elena, thank you so much for taking the care to create a great storytelling piece. So with that said, let's see what I came up with. Eva lingered at the entrance of her home, which was a cottage, which was empty. Not yet ready to push the door open, her bare feet soaked into the floorboard cold, while her toes kissed the splinters of the threshold, which was worn from the traffic of large boots, which were absent from the two ovals of dry mud that had been dry too long. Maybe tomorrow she'd clean them. Maybe tomorrow. Her hands, like her toes, found splinters. The door where she placed her hands was not worn smooth like the threshold, so splinters were easy to find. The stab of the cold and splinters grounded her, reminded her, though she didn't need reminding. A ritual she performed yet never finished. Today would be different. Today she would finish. The comfort of her cottage no longer comforted her. It had grown dark and festered with memories she couldn't hide from. They infested the down mattress she had cleaned and cleaned and cleaned. They infested the view from the small window in her room, from which she used to gaze and sing with her hands crossed over her stomach, because it was warm and stretched and smooth. They infested the emptiness, which was everywhere, especially inside her. She was empty. This emptiness was a thread, red and unbreakable, which made it sharp. It encircled her middle in so many loops and trailed behind her to her empty room. She didn't need to turn and look to know where it ended, where it wanted to be. It ended at a red she hadn't been able to clean or hide, no matter how many blankets she knitted, no matter how many furs she laid. It was warm, though, beneath those layers. She had spent many days there, many weeks, sometimes not even getting up to use the toilet. She knew it was dirty, filthy, and abhorrent, but it too was warm. She thought the smell might cover up the stain, become even stronger than what she could not clean. It never did. So here she found herself, at the door, which had been a journey. She had made it twice. The first time she arrived naked, having forgotten the need for clothes, having forgotten to need. This emptiness also stained her clothes. No matter how much she washed, no matter how long she left them on the line to dry in the midday sun, the emptiness remained. But today she decided she would wear that emptiness because it was inside her already, and she feared it no longer. She had donned her wedding dress because it was the only one clean, as clean and smooth as her bedding. A small part of her thought she might never come back, and wanted to ensure that whoever discovered her empty cottage wouldn't feel the emptiness lingering there. Maybe that traveler would find comfort in the love she had left, and she did leave it, because she couldn't carry it with her. It was too heavy. The other half was carried by boots missing from their muddy spot near the door. A drop of crimson beaded where her right hand touched the door. She smelled iron, a smell she was intimate with, a smell that brought both joy and sadness. Those emotions wrestled in her head, in her bosom, in her emptiness, and she knew she must act now, or they would wrestle her back to her bed, where she would be drowned in the deepest depths by the unbreakable thread that was the color of the blood on her pale hand. The door whimpered open, and the wind threw it to batter the cottage wall. She teetered on the threshold while the wind fought the unbreakable thread around her, and her hair fought her vision. She thought her back might break, and then she would be forced to lay at the threshold, unable to venture out or to return to the emptiness of the cottage. She joined the wind's side in battle, fighting blind through the whipping locks of her hair, which she had brushed many hours in preparation for this moment, because she must look beautiful for them. A snap resounded like splintering wood, like a blade of thunder, but it was not her spine because she stood outside her empty cottage. The clouds, exhausted too, lay across the ground in ghostly heaps, but they didn't obscure, they illuminated. Frosty swathes molded a path that led her to trodden trails flanked by yellowed grass. She knew why it was yellow, but couldn't say the word, so used to the color because it was a warm color, and outside was cold. Where paths converged sat a bushel of yellow grass, where it had happened thrice, her emptiness. The soil there still damp, but not from the mist. The soil dark there, but not from shadow. She closed her eyes because it was the only way to see them. She waited for a time, relishing the sensation of her veil and tresses and gown giving in to the breeze that crawled over the yellow grass. Then the swish and crunch of footsteps were near. Too many to be her love, but they were her loves too, all three. They waded toward her, ever shadows, ever twisted, ever cold. Crawling still, but of course they should. She wished to warm them, but her hands were locked to her belly, which was loose and scarred. The final place where her emptiness festered, where it was with her always. She beckoned her three loves, who had no names. She could never bring herself to give them any, because that would anchor them to this world, and they were too good for it, too pure, no matter how they appeared. They came to her, and she held them, and she told them she loved them, and she asked for their forgiveness. But they told her there was nothing to forgive, and she was empty no more. Welcome to the end reviewer. I'm so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe what I learned. So one thing I've learned actually from Mr. Donald Ray Pollock in reading his Knock 'em Stiff and The Devil All the Time is that sometimes life experiences are what you need to create great stories or fiction or art or whatever it may be. And so while this artwork seemed as though these strange shadowy creatures were monsters going to attack this woman, I decided to take it a different route. I decided to make them her lost children. She has a bit of a sadness on her face. Her eyes are closed. She's wearing her wedding dress. And so there's a lot of potential symbolism there. And so I decided I would take a stab at that because I've experienced that in my life. Not me personally, of course, and I can't imagine what that is like for another woman. But it's one of those things that most people don't really talk about, and it's really strange because I feel like it happens all the time, and it's a really big deal. But we rarely hear about it, and honestly, in the medical industry, there's not a whole lot that can be done. So I thought I would take a little bit of that experience and try to tell the story. Again, like I can't imagine what it's like for another woman, but from someone on the outside, I thought it would be interesting to tell a story like this from the perspective of this woman. And so you can see she's in this empty cottage, right? That's a word that I repeat over and over and over again. And so the writing here is more poetic than I normally do. It's a little bit more dreamy because I thought she would be in that headspace. And so the writing itself really, I tried to make it reflect that. I tried to make it sort of flowy, repetitive, using keywords, like I said, like splinters and emptiness and festering, just those words that hopefully conjure up her feelings. And so you can tell that she's in this empty cottage. She's alone. There's some boots that are missing, right? There's some dirt spots, some mud spots dried on the floor beside the door, indicating that her husband, her lover, her boyfriend, whoever it may be, has left, has abandoned her, and so she's alone in this empty place, and she's ready to go out, right? She's standing at this threshold, she's standing at the door, but she's finding these splinters, and they're cutting her hands, right? Because she finds this journey, and that's another thing I refer to it as. It's a journey, literally getting from the bed to the door, and these splinters are stabbing her, they're grounding her, reminding her, though she did not need reminding, because obviously it's always on her mind. A ritual she performed it, and it never finished, meaning she's tried this numerous times. She's tried to leave this house. She's tried to leave this cave, this shell, whatever you want to call it. But today she is convinced that she will finish this. And this is when I begin to hint at the fact that this emptiness, right, that is infesting her and her cottage. So they infested the down mattress. She had cleaned and cleaned and cleaned. They infested the view from the small window in her room where she used to gaze with her hands crossed over her stomach because it was warm and stretched smooth. And there's a counterpoint, there's a contrast to this toward the end, which I'll get to. But finally, of course, they infested the emptiness, which was everywhere, especially inside her. She was empty. You know, obviously that doesn't only reflect her mental state, but her womb, essentially. But she's being pulled back, right? So this there's a thread, right? It's a metaphor that is red and unbreakable. It's making it sharp because it's so thin, and it is pulling her back to this bed. But she cannot cover it, right? Because she cannot cover the stains there. She hadn't been able to clean her hide, no matter how many blankets she knitted, no matter how many furs she laid. It was warm though beneath those layers. So it's comforting to a degree, because it's frightening for her to leave this space. And this next paragraph is again getting into her mental space. So she found herself at the door, which had been a journey, journey being a key word, like it being difficult to get there. She had made it twice. The first time she arrived naked, having forgotten the need for clothes, having forgotten the need. So, you know, if you're ever in a situation where something traumatic has happened in your life, you'll know that you don't quite think right. And so I just added that in there as kind of an element to help emphasize that fact, where she just is kind of spaced out. She's not herself whatsoever. And so this is where I decided to figure out a way for her to wear a wedding dress. Like, why is this woman out there in her wedding dress? So I just decided that was her only clean dress. Everything else had been stained by her trauma. And so that is how she walks out in this wedding dress, because not only is she doing it, but for that reason, but because it sort of represents her love for this guy who left her. Which I guess I said it was her boyfriend or whoever, but clearly it's her husband if she has a wedding dress. Or maybe she didn't get married. Maybe it was something that was about to happen, and maybe all of this happened before she got married, and so that led her to the situation she's in right now. But her hand begins to bleed, right? She's pushing through this thing, and I use this verb here, the door whimpered open, right, to help personify it again, to inject the way she feels into the description of what she's observing. And this is the first time I ever hinted them, a plural, right? So, which she had brushed many hours her hair in preparation for this moment, because she must look beautiful for them. And so I don't know if that's the best way to do that. I feel like I could have, I don't know, maybe ditched the husband angle, maybe just kept it to the kids, maybe plotted out those elements a little bit better. But that is where I first indicated that she's going to see them. And then finally we get to the part where I'm describing the landscape. So the clouds are exhausted too. Again, it's more personification that is emphasizing her mental state, right? Because I think that's one thing that I'm trying to get better at, is writing the narration through the character's POV. I love limited POV. That is something that a lot of people don't take into account. I think they write on the surface, which is okay too, but you get so much more depth when you write narrative description from the POV of the character, using verbs or adjectives that sort of indicate their mental state, right? Because, you know, a lot of times the way we see the world is not just through our eyes, but it's through our experiences in our mind and our emotions. So I think that's an important thing to take into account. Obviously, you don't want to go overboard with it, but I'm trying to get better at it, to try to pay more attention to that aspect. And so finally, she gets to this bushel of the yellowed grass. And again, I love that, because the grass is dead, right? And it's something she knows how to describe it, but she's going to call it yellow instead of the dead grass, because yellow is a warm color, and she needs to feel that way. And this is where I said it had happened thrice, her emptiness. So I'm not sure if that was clear enough. And there's this Hemingway story, something about white elephants. I'll put the screenshot up here, but it's about a couple contemplating an abortion. I've been told. I've read the story. I didn't get that from it. I heard that interpretation from an editor, and so that story is extremely heavy with subtext. There's literally nowhere that says what's happening, so you have to really read between the lines. And I should probably go back and read it again because I still didn't grasp that from it. And to emphasize this emptiness, I'm talking about the soil is damp, but not from the mist. The soil is dark, but not from the shadow. And so hopefully that's hammering down exactly what I'm trying to get out here. And then because of the image, she has her eyes closed. She closed her eyes because it was the only way to see them, because they are deceased. They are no longer living. And I thought that would be kind of her connection to this, quote unquote spirit world. If there is one at all, it's probably just in her own head. But I'll leave that up to you to decide. And she hears them. She hears the swish and crunch of footsteps near her. Too many to be her love, being her husband, but they were also her loves too, all three. And they're walking toward her, ever twisted, ever cold, crawling still, but of course they should, because they're babies. She wished to warm them, but her hands were locked to her belly, which was loose and scarred. So that is the counterpoint I talked about earlier, where when she was gazing out this window, happily pregnant, she's touching her belly, which is stretched smooth, but now it is loose and scarred because of her loss. And that is the final place where emptiness festered, where it was with her always. But there's a little bit of a happy ending to the story, I think. So they come to her, she embraces them. She asks for the forgiveness because, again, she feels like it's her body that destroyed them, essentially. But they told her there was nothing to forgive, and she was empty no more. We know that's truly not going to be the case for this woman, but at least for this moment, she has some kind of respite. She has some kind of hopefulness to hold on to. So for things I might tweak with this story, I'm not sure about the cadence of bringing in the children versus the husband. The husband kind of went nowhere. Maybe I should have created more of a finality to his existence. And then so she goes on to see her children because she has to go to the spot for whatever reason. This is where her pain lied. This is where her children gathered, her dead children. All right, so that is it for the story. I know it's a little bit of a downer. It's a little bit sad, but I think that with fiction, you want to explore all kinds of things, right? You don't want to explore just the most heroic moments or the happiest moments. I think it's a great lens for you to discover the dark moments in your life. Maybe even communicate those ideas or those feelings to people who have not experienced them. And I think, again, that's one of the very unique things about fiction, that you can just dig so much deeper than you can in paintings or in film even, or in music sometimes. But maybe give yourself an excuse to write something that has happened to you in your own life. Don't try to just tell a story about a character who is not you. Make that character part of you. And I know sometimes that happens automatically, but just think about it. Be deliberate with it. And maybe you'll find yourself writing some of your most powerful work. So thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.